The Dragon King did not collapse when the nobles offered him gold. He collapsed when the servant girl refused to clap. Maren Vale stood at the edge of the Ember Hall with both hands open and empty, while the court performed the Heart-Tithe around her. Noble daughters pressed their jeweled palms together in perfect rhythm. One clap for blood. One clap for loyalty. One clap for the king whose heartfire supposedly fed every dragon-blooded house in the realm. The Heart-Tithe did not ask whether hands believed. It only needed them to repeat. Maren's hands did not move. That was what made the court laugh. Not because she had no magic. That was old news. Servants without visible flame were useful, quiet things. They carried coal, washed ash, scrubbed soot from the black marble after noble rituals made beautiful messes. No one expected Maren to bloom dragonfire from her fingers. They laughed because even empty hands were expected to obey rhythm. And hers would not. High Chancellor Orvain Marrow stood beside the bronze heart clock at the center of the hall, his black robe stitched with red gold veins of royal flame. The clock was taller than a man, shaped like a dragon's open rib cage, with a hollow chamber where an offering basin should have been. Inside that hollow, hundreds of tiny golden gears turned around a single suspended coal. Each time the nobles clapped, the coal pulsed. Each pulse traveled through narrow grooves in the floor toward the obsidian throne, where Dragon King Caedren Voryth sat without moving. Maren had cleaned those grooves for 3 years. She had always thought they carried power from the court to the king. Now, standing close enough to feel the rhythm under her bare feet, she realized the pulse moved the wrong way. It was not feeding him. It was taking from him. Caedren sat above them in black scale armor, tall and but there was no heart halo around him. No living aura of dragonfire pulsing from his chest the way old paintings showed around true dragon kings. His fire burned everywhere except where a heart should answer. Maren noticed. Caedren noticed her noticing. For one dangerous breath, his gaze locked on her empty hands. Not angry, measuring, as if he had been waiting for something to fail. Orvain struck the floor with his staff. The servant girl breaks tithe rhythm. The clapping stopped. Silence fell too quickly, too eagerly. Maren felt it then. She had not been dragged into the ritual by accident. Her kitchen mistress had not chosen her name from a servant roll. The black cord around her wrists, the thin gray dress scrubbed clean but still smelling of ash water. The order to stand among noble daughters with nothing to offer, all of it had been arranged. Someone wanted the court to see her fail. Orvain smiled. Maren Vale, lowborn servant of the lower hearths. No house flame. No family tithe. No recorded blood mark. You were brought here because the Heart-Tithe accepts service as offering when magic is absent. Maren kept her hands open. And yet, Orvain continued, you refuse even rhythm. A noble girl laughed behind her jeweled veil. Perhaps empty hands cannot hear. Another whispered. Perhaps empty blood has no beat. Maren lowered her eyes. She had heard worse. Empty girl. Ash stray. Hearth rat. Palace foundling. A child left with no cradle token except a strip of burned cloth around one wrist. What she had never told anyone was that clapping hurt. Not her skin, not her bones. Somewhere deeper. Every forced rhythm struck an ache inside her palms. A hollow tenderness she had carried since childhood. Her mother, before she vanished from the lower hearths, had once caught Maren trying to clap along with festival drums and had seized both her hands so hard the girl cried out. Never answer a borrowed beat, her mother had whispered. Then she had kissed Maren's palms as if apologizing to something sleeping inside them. 3 days later, she was gone. Recorded as coal fever. No grave ember lit. Maren had never clapped again. Orvain stepped closer. Raise your hands. Maren did. They were raw from work. Pale at the fingertips. Empty as ever. Clap once, he said. Prove service can answer where blood cannot. Maren looked at the heart clock. The suspended coal pulsed. Caedren's hand tightened on the throne arm. There. So small no one else saw it. Fine. The Dragon King felt each pulse, and he had let the ritual continue. Maren looked at him then. Not with worship, not with pleading, but with the quiet hatred of a servant recognizing she had been placed where a king's suspicion needed a body. Caedren's expression did not change, but something in his eyes darkened. Yes, Maren thought. You knew enough to watch, not enough to warn me. Clap, Orvain commanded. The black cord around Maren's wrist tightened, lifting her hands toward each other. The court leaned in. The heart clock ticked. Maren's palms hovered an inch apart. The ache inside them woke. Not magic. Refusal. Her hands would not close. The cord pulled harder. Pain shot up her arms. Her fingers trembled. One more breath, and the cord would force the clap through her body whether she chose it or not. Then the suspended coal inside the heart clock stopped beating. The entire Ember Hall went cold. Caedren rose halfway from the throne. Orvain's smile vanished. Maren's hands remained apart. Between them, in the narrow space where the forced clap should have happened, a golden light appeared. Not flame. A heartbeat. It pulsed once. Caedren gasped. The sound tore through the hall like a blade through silk. The Dragon King staggered down one step from the throne. One hand pressed to his chest. Every noble tithe jewel dimmed at once. The grooves in the floor reversed direction, ripping golden light out of necklaces, rings, hairpins, and offering bracelets. Noble daughters cried out as their inherited flames guttered. Maren tried to step back. The light between her palms followed. It beat again. Caedren fell to one knee. The court stopped breathing. Kings did not kneel in the Ember Hall. Dragon Kings did not drop before servant girls with empty hands. Orvain lifted his staff. Seize her. She has interrupted the Heart-Tithe. No one moved. The golden heartbeat between Maren's palms turned toward the Chancellor. Black smoke leaked from the red gold veins sewn into his robes. Caedren looked at the light as if staring at something he had lost before he knew how to name loss. That beat, he said, voice rough, is mine. Maren could barely breathe. I did not take it. Orvain's voice sharpened. Her mother was a hearth thief. The bloodline proves itself at last. The word mother struck harder than accusation. The golden heartbeat flared. Not bright. Angry. The bronze heart clock cracked from top to base. Behind its gears, hidden under layers of noble offering marks, dozens of thin black threads snapped into view. They did not run from Maren to Caedren. They ran from Caedren's chest into the court, into Orvain's staff, into the noble's jewels, into the clock. Maren understood then. The court had not been feeding the king. They had taught his stolen heart to beat in their jewelry. It had been making the king's missing heart beat for them. The golden light between her palms grew warmer, familiar in a way that frightened her more than fire. Not stored power, not stolen treasure. A withheld answer. A beat that had refused to return to the wrong hands. The heart clock split open. From inside its hollow chamber came a woman's voice, thin with ash and love. Maren's mother. I did not steal the Dragon King's heartfire. The golden beat lifted between Maren's empty hands. I taught it how to say no. Caedren reached for the beat, and the heartfire refused its king. The golden pulse drew back between Maren's hands as if his fingers carried a wound it remembered too well. Not hatred. Not rejection. Fear. The kind of fear that did not belong to flame, but to something living that had learned the difference between a hand reaching to hold and a hand reaching to return it to a cage. Caedren stopped instantly. Good. Maren had not known she wanted him to stop until he did. The Dragon King stood half-bent on the steps below his throne. One knee still pressed into black marble. One hand extended toward the golden heartbeat trembling between her palms. His face was pale beneath the burnished light, stripped of the cold royal stillness that had made nobles worship and servants shrink. For the first time, the court could see what his armor had hidden. There was a hollow in him, and the flame in Maren's hands knew it. Behind the throne, the bronze heart clock ticked once. The heartfire flinched. Maren felt it like a struck nerve. The golden beat recoiled toward her chest, not into her skin, but closer to the space between her palms, where it had first appeared when her hands refused to clap. The black threads running from Caedren's chest into the court tightened. Every noble tithe jewel pulsed weakly, as if trying to remember its stolen rhythm. Orvain saw the same thing. He did not look at the heartfire like a thief caught stealing. He looked at it like a master watching property disobey. Step away from the servant, the Chancellor said. Caedren's eyes moved slowly toward him. Orvain lifted his staff, red gold veins in his robes smoking where the heartfire had exposed them. Your Majesty, The flame is unstable because it has been contaminated by Hearth-Tithe blood. Maren's fingers tightened around empty air. The heartbeat pulsed harder. My mother was no thief, she said. The words surprised her. Not because she did not believe them, but because she had spent years swallowing every accusation about the woman who vanished from the lower hearths. Coal fever, theft, shame, servant rumor, a mother reduced to a warning no one had to prove. Orvain turned toward her with cold satisfaction. Your mother vanished after royal Heartfire disappeared. Now that same Heartfire answers your hands. The proof sits between your fingers. Maren looked down at the golden beat. It looked too alive to be proof, too frightened to be stolen. She lifted it slightly toward Orvain. The black smoke in his robes thickened. If my mother stole it, she asked, why does it answer no to you? The Ember Hall went silent. The heart clock cracked again. This time the fracture ran through the dragon rib frame and down into the floor grooves, splitting the gold channels that had carried pulse after pulse from the king into the noble houses. Behind the crack, Maren saw not gears, but tiny hooks. Hundreds of them. Each hook caught around a strand of golden rhythm, pulling it forward whenever the court clapped. A noble girl cried out and clutched her necklace as the jewel at her throat went dim. Another nobleman looked at his ring as if it had betrayed him. The heartbeat between Maren's palms turned toward the court. One pulse. Every jeweled offering answered. Not with light, with acclaim. The sound filled the hall. Soft claps layered over years. Noble hands striking together. House after house after house. Not offering, not loyalty. A repeating demand, pressed into ritual until no one had to say what they were taking. The Heart-Tithe did not ask whether hands believed. It only needed them to repeat. Maren stared as the hidden rhythm unfolded around her. Each clap had been a little claim on the king's Heartfire. One from House Veyrath to keep its bloodline warm. One from House Solmir to keep its dragonbone mines burning. One from House Oren to strengthen sick heirs. One from Orvain's own line, deeper and older, buried beneath every official chant. The court had taught Caedren's stolen heart to beat in their jewelry. Her stomach turned. Caedren rose slowly from the step. But the moment he straightened, the black threads through his chest pulled tight. He staggered, jaw locking against the pain. His heart halo flickered around him for the first time, thin, broken, gold at the edges, but the heart clock drank it before it could form. Maren watched his face change. He knew. Not all of it. Enough. You knew the ritual was wrong, she said. The words fell between them harder than flame. Caedren did not hide behind command. I knew it hurt. That was worse. Maren's throat tightened. Caedren looked toward the heart clock, then the nobles, then the golden bead in her hands. The Heart-Tithe existed before my crown. Orvain told me the pain was the cost of keeping the houses bound. A king's fire shared across the realm. A stable kingdom. Dragon lines preserved. Maren looked at the dim jewels around the room. Noble daughters clutching their inherited magic. Old lords staring at rings that had never belonged entirely to them. A chancellor whose robes smoked from stolen rhythm. Stable for whom? Caedren's answer did not come. Good. Some questions deserved to wound before they were answered. Orvain struck his staff against the marble. The Dragon King owes Heartfire to his people. That is the foundation of crown and flame. The golden beat snapped black gold for one breath. Angry, Maren felt her hands grow warmer. Not burning. Remembering. Her mother's voice from the cracked heart clock whispered again. Too faint for the court, but clear enough for her. Do not return a stolen beat to the rhythm that taught it pain. Maren inhaled slowly. She did not know how to command fire. She did not know how to heal a king. She did not know how to stand before a court and survive a law made to make servants small. But she knew how not to clap. She separated her hands another inch. The black cord around her wrists snapped. The sound struck the hall like a bone breaking. The Heartfire expanded between her palms, forming a golden circle, not a crown, not a dragon, not a weapon. A pause. A living pause in the rhythm the court had used for years. The noble's jewels dimmed further. Orvain's staff cracked along its red gold veins. Caedren stared at Maren's freed wrists. What are you doing? She looked at the heart clock, stopping the repeat. The court had mistaken obedience for loyalty for so long that silence sounded like rebellion. The Heartfire pulsed once. The entire court's forced rhythm broke. Some nobles cried out as their magic flickered. Others reached for one another, suddenly terrified of what they had called inheritance. The bronze heart clock opened wider, exposing a hidden inner ring beneath the gears. On that ring were tiny marks shaped like hands pressed together. Thousands of claps, thousands of claims. Maren stepped closer, Heartfire floating between her palms. The inner ring began to turn backward. Memory spilled out. A child, Caedren, no older than 6, standing barefoot before the same heart clock. His chest glowed with a full golden heart halo then, bright enough to warm the hall. Beside him stood an older king with Caedren's molten eyes and a black crown set with emberstone. Caedren's father. The court clapped around them. The child flinched. The crowned king took his son's small hands and forced them together. One clap. The child's heartfire split. The first tithe had not been given by a king. It had been taken from a child. Caedren made a sound behind Maren as if the memory had cut him through. Orvain whispered, "No." The memory did not stop. The older king smiled while the heart clock drank the child's first broken beat. Then he turned to the nobles and raised his crowned hand. "Again," he commanded. The heart clock showed the first hand that taught the court to clap. It wore Caedren's father's crown. The first tithe had not been given by a king. It had been taken from a child. The memory hung inside the cracked heart clock, golden and merciless, showing young Caedren's small hands forced together by the crowned man who should have protected them. One clap, one broken beat. One child's heartfire split open while the court watched and learned how to make theft sound like devotion. The older king in the memory smiled as the first stolen pulse entered the bronze gears. Again he had commanded, and the court had obeyed. The nobles in the Ember Hall did not look away because they were horrified. They looked away because some of their jewels were still beating with the rhythm that child had lost. Maren stood before the heart clock with the golden heartbeat hovering between her open palms, warm and alive and still refusing every rhythm that tried to claim it. Her wrists were free now. The black cord snapped at her feet, but freedom did not feel light. Not with the Dragon King on one knee behind her. Not with the court's magic dimming by the breath. Not with Orvain watching her like a lock he had not yet finished opening. The memory of the first clap faded. The damage remained. Caedren's face was pale, his molten eyes fixed on the place where his child self had stood. One hand pressed against his chest as the black threads running into the court pulsed through him. They had tightened after the memory, as if the heart clock were punishing him for remembering. Orvain bowed to the fading image of the dead king. Not in shame, in reverence. "Royal initiation," he said. Maren turned slowly toward him. The heartfire between her hands pulsed once, low and warning. Orvain lifted his chin. The first sharing of sovereign flame. The founding act that bound the noble houses to the throne. Without that tithe, half the dragon lines in this hall would have died cold. Maren looked at the noble daughters clutching dim necklaces, at old lords staring down at rings whose inner fire flickered like sick candles, at court ladies pressing trembling hands against their chests, as if inherited magic had always belonged to them simply because no one had made them watch the first wound. "You named theft tradition," Maren said. "Because the first victim wore a crown." The words struck the hall harder than a shout. Caedren closed his eyes. Orvain did not flinch. "A crown exists to carry what others cannot. A child is not a crown. The child became king, after you taught his heart to serve before it knew how to refuse." For one breath, Orvain's smooth mask cracked. Then the heart clock shuddered. The suspended coal inside it, the one that had stopped when Maren refused to clap, sparked weakly. Around the room, noble jewels flickered in answer. Panic moved through the court like a cold wind. A nobleman's dragonbone ring went dark, and he cried out as scales along his wrist faded into ordinary skin. A lady's emberstone necklace cracked, spilling dust instead of flame. Somewhere near the left pillars, a young noble collapsed as the borrowed magic holding his breath steady began to fail. Orvain raised his staff. Enough. The red gold veins in his robes burned brighter, but the light no longer looked rich. It looked hungry. "The realm survives on shared heartfire," he said. Break the rhythm, and you do not free the king. You kill every house tied to him. Maren's hands tightened around the golden beat without touching it. The Heartfire trembled. Not at Orvain. At the word tied, Caedren forced himself to stand. The black threads through his chest pulled so hard his armor creaked. Then cut the ties. Orvain smiled faintly. Gladly, Majesty. Break the heart clock, and every thread snaps at once. The houses lose borrowed fire. The crown loses return. Flow. Your remaining Heartfire burns out before sunset. Maren looked back at Caedren. His expression told her Orvain was not lying. Not fully. That was the cruelty of good traps. They were built with enough truth to punish escape. Caedren's voice was rough. If I take it back before the clock dies, I give them a road back into my chest. The Heartfire pulsed toward him, then away again. It wanted him. It feared the road. Maren felt the truth of that fear in her palms. The golden beat did not hate its king. It remembered being forced from him. It remembered the rhythm behind the throne. It remembered the court clapping until pain became policy. Orvain pointed his staff at Maren. There is one clean solution. The nobles turned toward her too quickly. Maren knew before he said it. The servant broke the rhythm, Orvain declared. The servant must restore it. One clap from the hands that hold refusal will stabilize the clock long enough to return the Heartfire under lawful supervision. Caedren's head snapped toward him. No. The black threads yanked him backward. He staggered. Orvain's smile sharpened. Your Majesty has no Heartfire authority while the beat remains outside your body. Maren looked at the heart clock. One clap. That was all they wanted. One clap to turn refusal into rhythm. One clap to make her mother wrong. One clap to teach the golden beat that even the hands protecting it could be forced to repeat. The court leaned closer. Some with fear. Some with hope. Some with the ugly relief of people who would rather see a servant break than lose what they had never earned. Maren lifted her hands slightly. The golden heartbeat hovered between them, small and bright. Caedren fought the threads again, pain carving itself across his face. Maren. She did not look at him. She could not let his fear decide what her hands did. The Heartfire belonged to him, but the refusal inside it had been taught by someone else. Someone who had vanished under the name Coal Fever. Someone who had kissed Maren's palms and begged her never to answer a borrowed beat. Vale. Her mother had a name. Not Coal Fever. Not Hearth-Thief. Not servant sickness. Not a court rumor buried in lower hall ash. Vale. Maren turned to the cracked clock. Where's my mother? Orvain went still. The Heartfire stopped trembling. The bronze heart clock answered. Not in words. In gears. The deepest ring inside the clock began to turn. Slow and grinding. Far beneath the hooks. Beneath the noble claims. Beneath the first clap. Beneath every official offering mark. A hidden chamber opened behind the suspended coal, and with it came the smell of ash water, hearth smoke, and burned skin. Maren's breath caught. Coal fever, Orvain said quickly. Was a servant illness, nothing more. The Heartfire flashed black gold. A woman's voice whispered through the gears. Coal fever was what they called servants who burned from refusing the rhythm. Maren nearly dropped the Heartfire. Her mother's voice. Clearer now. Closer. The inner chamber opened wider. Inside, light did not pour out. A hand did. Not dead. Not bone. A living hand. Ash-burned and trembling. Pressed between two golden gears that had been trying for years to close. The fingers were scarred, blackened at the edges, but still spread wide, holding the mechanism apart by force of refusal. Maren took one step toward the clock. No, Orvain said. This time there was fear in it. Real fear. Caedren saw the hand and went utterly still. The golden beat between Maren's palms leaned toward the chamber like a child recognizing the person who had kept the door open. Orvain's face hardened. Vale did not die of coal fever, he said. She became useful. The words emptied the hall. Maren stared at the living hand trapped inside the clock and understood the horror beneath the miracle. Her mother was alive enough to suffer, not alive enough to leave. The heart clock opened its deepest chamber. Inside, Vale was not a corpse. She was the hand still holding the beat apart. Maren's mother had been holding the kingdom apart with one burned hand for 7 years, not with a crown, not with noble blood, not with dragonfire bright enough for songs. One hand, one ash-burned, trembling, servant hand pressed between 2 golden gears so the heart clock could not close around the stolen bead it had been built to devour. Maren could not breathe. The deepest chamber of the clock stood open before her, breathing heat and old pain into the ember hall. Inside, Saela Vale's hand remained spread wide, the fingers blackened at the edges, the knuckles scarred, the palm glowing faintly where the golden rhythm pressed against her skin. Maren remembered that hand smoothing her hair, mending her sleeves, covering her little palms before festival drums could teach them obedience. Now those same fingers were trapped in machinery that called refusal useful. Orvain stepped closer to the clock, his staff tapping once against the cracked marble. "Do not look at her as if she is a prisoner," he said. Saela Vale served the realm. The golden heartbeat between Maren's hands turned sharp. "She served nothing," Maren said. "You trapped her. She interfered with royal heartfire. She protected it. She damaged the rhythm that kept the kingdom alive." Orvain's voice hardened. Without that hand holding the gears apart, the clock would have closed too quickly. The houses would have felt the loss. The king would have felt the theft. Panic would have spread. Maren looked at him slowly. "So you kept her suffering because suffering quietly was useful." The words left a silence behind them. Even the nobles heard it. Caedren stood several paces away, held upright only by rage and pain. The black threads running from his chest into the floor grooves had tightened so deeply they looked almost physical now. Thin, dark cords pulsing beneath his armor and vanishing into the heart clock. His heart halo flickered around him, trying to form and failing each time the clock tugged. He stared at Saela's hand as if the sight had rearranged every law he had ever inherited. "If she releases the gears," he said, voice rough, "the clock closes." Orvain's mouth curved. "Yes. And if the clock closes, it takes the loose heartfire back into proper channel." Maren understood the phrase before Caedren answered. Proper channel. The court. The jewels. The houses. The throne. The same old rhythm, tightened with new proof, and fed by whatever the clock could seize. Caedren's gaze moved to the golden bead in Maren's hands. "It will pull the heartfire through me and back into them." "Through you, Majesty," Orvain said. "As crown law requires." Maren stepped toward the chamber. The heartfire pulsed a warning so hard her palms shook. "Not yet." She froze, tears burning behind her eyes. Saela's fingers trembled between the gears. A whisper slipped out through the machinery, thin as smoke through a cracked door. "Maren." That one word nearly made her run forward anyway. Orvain lifted his staff. "Touch her." And the gears snapped shut. "The clock will take the king, the heartfire, and whatever remains of Saela with it." Maren turned on him. "Then open it." "I cannot. You built your power on it. I maintained what greater men made." His eyes sharpened. "But you can replace her." The hall seemed to tilt. Caedren's voice came low. "No." Orvain ignored him. He looked only at Maren's hands, at the heartbeat hovering between them, at the refusal her mother had taught it. "The clock does not need Saela's whole body. It needs a hand that can hold refusal open while the rhythm restabilizes. Your mother is nearly spent. You are fresh. Your hands already carry the beat." Maren felt cold move through her blood. Not death. Worse. Usefulness. The same word he had used for Saela. The same fate dressed as necessity. The nobles shifted uneasily. But none spoke against it. Their magic was fading. Their jewels were dim. Their inherited comforts were turning to ordinary stones around their throats. Fear had made them ugly, and Orvain knew exactly how to feed it. "Clap once," he said softly. "Only once. The clock will accept you as the new refusal. Hand. Your mother's suffering ends. The houses stabilize. The king survives." Maren looked at her mother's hand. The gears pressed closer. Saela's fingers did not close. Not even now. Maren understood then why her mother had kissed her palms all those years ago. She had not been blessing magic. She had been begging a child never to let the world make obedience feel like love. Caedren moved. The black threads jerked him back so violently he dropped to one knee. A sound tore from him, half snarl, half breath. The Heartfire leapt toward him, and the threads drank at its edge. Maren pulled the beat closer. Caedren lifted his head, pain bright in his molten eyes. Do not take her place. I was not planning to. Orvain laughed under his breath. Then she dies inside the clock. The golden beat trembled. Maren turned back to the deepest chamber. Her voice broke, but she did not lower it. Mother. The hand inside the gears flexed. How do I free you without feeding them? For one heartbeat, nothing answered. Then the chamber filled with warmth. Not the clock's heat. Not the court's stolen rhythm. Something smaller. Older. The warmth of the lower hearths before dawn, when Saela had baked bread from scraps and pretended hunger was not in the room. The warmth of hands covering hands. The warmth of refusal passed down without a name. Saela's voice came through the gears. Teach the king to refuse with you. The entire clock shuddered. Orvain's face changed. Caedren bent still. Maren looked back at him. For the first time since the Heartfire had appeared. The answer did not rest in her hands alone. Not because she needed him to save her. Not because the fire belonged to him more than the choice belonged to her. Because the rhythm had been built from two wounds. A king taught to clap, and a servant taught never to. The beat between her palms pulsed once toward Caedren. He understood. Orvain snapped. Majesty. Do not. The black threads tightened through Caedren's chest, dragging him toward the throne. The court's jewels flickered hungrily. The heart clock began to tick again, slow and dangerous, trying to rebuild the rhythm before either of them could break it. Caedren rose. Not fully. Not easily. Every inch looked like agony. But he rose. Maren watched him lift his hands. They were shaking, not with fear, with memory. A child's hands forced together before the court. A first clap stolen under a father's crown. Years of pain renamed duty. A kingdom taught to call his hollow stability. Orvain raised his staff. The Dragon King commands the Heart-Tithe. Caedren looked at the court, then at Maren, then at the hand inside the clock. No, he said. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. The golden heartbeat between Maren's palms flared. Caedren lifted his wounded hands. For the first time in his life, the Dragon King did not command the court to clap. He opened his palms. Caedren's open hands broke the rhythm before the heart clock understood what had happened. For a single breath, the Ember Hall lost its sound. No clap, no tick, no borrowed pulse moving through gold grooves, no noble hands striking together because fear had taught them that repetition was safer than truth. Maren stood with the golden heartbeat hovering between her palms, watching the Dragon King hold his own hands apart as if the space between them were a battlefield. His fingers shook. Not from weakness, from memory. The clock had spent years teaching his body to obey pain before thought could refuse it. Every black thread in his chest pulled toward the throne, toward the gears, toward the court's waiting jewels. Still, his hands did not close. The Heartfire answered. It widened between Maren's palms, stretching into a golden arc that reached toward Caedren without leaving her. Not returning, not surrendering, answering. A living beat passing between two refusals. Saela's trapped hand flexed inside the deepest chamber. The gears stuttered. Orvain's face lost all softness. Stop. No one moved. The command had nowhere to land. For the first time, the court did not know which rhythm to follow. Maren felt the Heartfire push gently against her fingers, urging but not forcing. She understood. Caedren could refuse the clap that had wounded him, but he could not free Saela alone. She could hold the beat away from the clock, but she could not undo the king's first stolen rhythm without him. This was not salvation. It was alignment. Caedren's voice came low through clenched teeth. What now? Maren looked at the black threads in his chest, then at her mother's hand between the gears. We make the clock. Hear both refusals. Orvain slammed his staff into the floor. The red gold veins in his robes erupted with stolen fire. Noble houses. Restore the tithe. The court hesitated. Then fear won. A lord near the eastern pillars clapped. The sound cracked through the hall like a whip. His ring flared back to life. A lady followed. Then another. Then 10 more. The heart clock lurched. Hungry and grateful. The gears around Saela's hand began to close. Her burned fingers bent under the pressure, and Maren felt the pain shoot through the heartfire into her own palms. No, Maren gasped. Caedren's hands strained apart, but the renewed rhythm fed the black threads. He staggered, nearly folding under the pull. Orvain lifted his staff toward the nobles. Again, the court clapped. The rhythm returned, ugly and desperate. One clap for fear. One clap for stolen blood. One clap for the lie that comfort deserved a body beneath it. Maren's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She could not fight every noble hand by force. The heartfire was not a weapon to burn them with. Saela had taught it refusal, not revenge. So Maren did the only thing the court had never expected from empty hands. She gave them something else to hold. She stepped toward Lady Voryth, the noblewoman whose necklace had already cracked and released its borrowed pulse. The woman flinched as Maren came near, but Maren did not raise the heartfire against her. She opened one hand slightly, letting a small golden spark drift free. The spark hovered before Lady Voryth's trembling fingers. "Do not clap," Maren said. "Name what your house took." Lady Voryth stared at her. "If I do, my heir dies." "Does he live because my mother suffers?" The question was quiet. It ruined the woman anyway. Lady Voryth looked down at her broken necklace. Her lips trembled. Around her, the other nobles kept clapping, but her hands slowly lowered. "My house borrowed one pulse," she whispered. "For a dying child." The heartfire spark brightened. "And repaid none," Maren said. Tears spilled over Lady Voryth's face. "Repaid none." Her necklace shattered completely. The golden pulse inside it flew to Maren's spark, then across the hall to the heartfire, circling it once before entering the open space between Maren and Caedren. The heart clock faltered. One clap disappeared from the rhythm. Caedren inhaled sharply as one black thread loosened from his chest. Inside the chamber, Saela's hand eased by the width of a breath. Maren turned to the next noble. A gray-haired lord clutched his dragonbone ring. "My mines will go cold. How many servants burned to keep them warm?" Maren asked. He looked away. The golden spark waited before him. The clapping around him became less certain. "My house claimed 3 pulses," he said, voice breaking. "Under emergency winter charter." "And repaid?" His jaw worked. Maren did not move. Caedren did not speak. The heartfire waited because refusal meant nothing if truth was forced into another rhythm. The old lord lowered his hands. "Repaid none." His ring cracked. Another pulse returned. The clock stuttered again. Orvain's eyes blazed. "Cowards. You think confession saves you? The moment the rhythm breaks, your bloodlines weaken. Your wards fail. Your enemies cross the borders." Maren looked at the court. "Then build with what is yours." The words moved through the hall differently than flame. Servants heard them first. A kitchen boy near the rear lowered his tray and stared at his own hands. A coal maid stopped shaking. A line of hearth servants, those who had cleaned noble soot for years, began to step away from the walls. Not toward Maren, toward the grooves. They had cleaned them, scrubbed them, bled over them. They knew where the channels bent, where the gold lines hid beneath rugs, where the pulse moved under noble feet. One by one, they placed their hands over the grooves. Not clapping, covering. The heart clock shuddered violently. Orvain turned on them. Back to the walls. No one obeyed. Maren felt something rise in her chest that was not power. Recognition. The court had always watched noble hands. It had forgotten servant hands knew the machinery better. Caedren saw it too. His gaze moved over the servants, then to Maren. There was awe in his face, but he did not make it soft. He did not reach for her. He did not claim what they were doing as his rebellion. He opened his hands wider. Blood appeared along his palms where the old memory of the first clap split his skin. The heartfire surged. Maren lifted both hands, mirroring him. Between them, the golden beat expanded, until the entire Ember Hall glowed with one steady pulse. Not clapped, held, Sayela's voice came through the deepest chamber. Now. Maren turned. The gears around her mother's hand had slowed. Not stopped. Slowed enough. She stepped toward the clock, but Orvain moved first. His staff struck the bronze frame, and the deepest chamber slammed half shut. Sayela cried out. Maren screamed her mother's name. Caedren lunged, but the last black threads yanked him backward. Orvain twisted the staff, and the red-gold veins in his robes tore open, revealing dozens of tiny heart pulses trapped beneath the fabric. Not just Caedren's. Others. Small ones. Weak ones. Maren froze. Orvain smiled through the smoke. Did you think the court fed only on kings? The Heartfire went cold. Inside Orvain's robes, stolen beats flickered like dying stars. Servants. Children. Hearth workers. Those recorded as coal fever. Maren's hands shook. Caedren's voice turned deadly. What are those? Orvain stepped back toward the heart clock. Staff raised, the stolen pulses answering him. Insurance. The gears tightened around Sayela's hand. Orvain looked at Maren. Free your mother. And I close my fist on every heart your lower halls forgot to bury. The stolen hearts inside Orvain's robes did not beat together. That was the first horror Maren understood. They flickered out of rhythm, each tiny pulse trapped beneath red gold seams like a firefly sewn into burial cloth. Some beat fast, frightened, and young. Some beat slow, nearly spent. Some were so faint they looked less like flame than memory, refusing to go dark. The court stared at them with the wrong kind of silence. Not surprise. Recognition delayed by convenience. Coal fever. Servant sickness. Hearth collapse. Ashlung. Every neat little death name the palace had used when a lower hall worker disappeared after touching royal flame. Maren looked at the flickering pulses, then at Sayela's burned hand caught between the gears. Her mother had not been the only one. She had simply been the hand strong enough to hold the clock open. Orvain saw the realization land and smiled. Now you understand restraint. Caedren's face had gone pale with fury. The black threads through his chest trembled as his heartfire strained toward the stolen pulses. Release them. How generous, Orvain said. The Hollow King orders mercy with a heart he does not possess. The insult struck. But Caedren did not move. He had learned, at least for this moment, that rage was another rhythm Orvain knew how to conduct. Maren stepped toward the Chancellor. The golden heartbeat between her palms followed, no longer soft, no longer afraid. It pulsed once toward the trapped flames beneath his robes. Several answered. Orvain's staff flared. The pulses tightened, shrinking under the embroidered veins. Somewhere behind Maren, a hearth servant cried out as if the pain had crossed old scars. Do not, Orvain said. Each beat is tied to a body that failed the rhythm. Some are dead. Some are nearly so. Some remain useful because I keep what little is left from burning out entirely. Useful, Maren whispered again. The word had become uglier each time he said it. Her mother's voice scraped through the deepest chamber. Maren. The gears pressed harder around Sayela's hand. The opening was narrowing. If Maren rushed to pull her free, Orvain would crush the hidden pulses. If she turned on him, the clock would close. If Caedren broke the threads by force, every claim might snap through the hall and tear Heartfire from anyone still tied to it. The trap was not mother or kingdom. It was mother or others like her. A servant's choice made cruel enough to look like morality. Maren took one breath, then another. Her hands remained open. No. Orvain's eyes narrowed. No? You do not get to make me choose which stolen heart matters. The golden heartbeat flared. Not large. Precise. Maren turned toward the servants who had covered the grooves. Who is missing from the lower halls? The question moved through them like a door opening. A coalmaid answered first, voice shaking. Nessa Breyer. Taken after the winter furnaces failed. One pulse beneath Orvain's robe sparked white. A kitchen boy stepped forward. Harlan Reed. He cleaned the west hearth alone and never came back. Another pulse answered. An old scullery woman raised both hands to her mouth. Toma Vale. My sister's boy. They said he breathed ash in his sleep. A third pulse flashed. Orvain's staff struck the floor. Silence. No one obeyed. That frightened him more than fire. Names began to rise across the ember hall, not shouted, not wild, but one by one, each carried by someone who had washed the floors, trimmed wicks, carried coal, buried rumors, and survived long enough to remember. Nessa Briar, Harlan Reed, Toma Vale, Ian Moss, Bryn Sallow, Sira of the East Hearth. With every name, a stolen beat beneath Orvain's robes flickered brighter. Maren understood then what the Heartfire wanted. Not rescue by force, recognition by name. She turned back to Caedren. Can you hold the threads without pulling them? He looked at the black lines buried in his chest. I can try. Trying is not enough if it feeds them. His jaw tightened. Then he nodded once, accepting the rebuke without making pain a crown. He opened his palms wider, the wounds across them glowing faint gold. I will hold, he said. Not claim. The Heartfire pulsed approval between them. Caedren inhaled sharply, as the black thread stopped dragging toward the throne and stretched outward instead, becoming taut lines across the hall. They still hurt him. Maren saw it in the tremor through his shoulders, but he did not pull them back into himself. He made his body a brace, not a road. Good. Maren lifted the golden beat toward Orvain. Name them, she said. Orvain laughed, but the sound was thinner now. You think names undo binding? No, Maren said. Names show where to loosen. The Heartfire split, not into pieces, into listening. Thin golden lines extended from Maren's hands to the named pulses beneath Orvain's robes. Each line touched a stolen beat and waited for its name to be spoken again by someone who loved, knew, or remembered it. Nessa Briar, the coal maid said. One seam in Orvain's robe burst. A tiny heart pulse flew out, white gold and trembling. It did not fly to Maren. It flew across the hall to the coal maid's hands, where she held it as if holding a bird too injured to close her fingers around. Harlan Reed, the kitchen boy whispered. Another seam burst. Toma Vale. Another. Orvain Stucheret. His robes were unraveling name by name. The court watched servants receive what nobles had unknowingly or knowingly warmed themselves with for years. Some nobles looked ashamed. Some looked terrified. A few looked angry enough to become dangerous later. Maren did not care yet. Later could wait its turn. Inside the heart clock, Sayala's fingers relaxed by another fraction. The gears slowed. The deepest chamber widened enough for Maren to see more than her mother's hand now. Part of a wrist, a forearm wrapped in blackened cloth, the edge of a face hidden behind turning gold. Maren's breath broke. Mother. Sayala's hand twitched toward her, but still did not reach. It kept holding the gears apart. Orvain lifted his staff with both hands. Enough. Red gold light flared from the staff's core. Maren saw a larger beat inside it, deeper and darker than the servant pulses. Not stolen from a lower hall. Not from Caedren. Old. Royal. Caedren saw it too. His expression changed from fury to horror. That is my father's beat, he said. Orvain smiled through the unraveling smoke. The first king who understood what Heartfire was for. The staff struck the heart clock. The memory of Caedren's father pulsed through the hall, and every noble hand jerked upward as if caught on invisible strings. Clap. The sound cracked out of them. Not willing. Forced. The stolen servant beats screamed in the hands that held them. Caedren nearly collapsed as the threads in his chest snapped tight again. Sayala's gears slammed inward, and Maren watched bloodless golden light crush around her mother's fingers. Maren screamed. The Heartfire in her palms blazed black gold. But Orvain had already begun the old rhythm. Clap. The noble's hands struck again. Clap. Servant hands over the grooves started shaking, dragged toward the same rhythm. Clap. Caedren's open palms trembled, forced toward each other by his father's dead beat inside Orvain's staff. Maren turned to him. Heartfire burning between them. Caedren. His hands hovered an inch apart. The same distance Maren's had been when the ritual tried to force her. The same distance where refusal had first appeared. Orvain's eyes shone. Every heart learns obedience eventually. Caedren's teeth bared. His palms shook harder. Then, slowly, painfully, he drove his hands farther apart. No, he said. The dead king's beat cracked inside the staff. Maren lifted her own hands with him, matching the distance, holding the Heartfire open between their refusals. Sayela's voice came through the clock. Weak but clear. Break the father's rhythm. The golden heartbeat narrowed into a blade of light between Maren's palms. Not for the clock. Not for the nobles. For the staff. Orvain pulled it back too late. Maren and Caedren spoke at the same time. No. The Heartfire struck the staff. The old royal bead inside it split open, and from the crack came a child's voice, Caedren's voice trapped inside his father's first command. Please stop. The voice inside Orvain's staff belonged to the boy Caedren, had been before the court taught him silence. Small, terrified, alive inside a command that had outlived the man who spoke it. The Ember Hall froze around that sound. Noble hands stopped mid-air, fingers spread in the shape of an unfinished clap. Servants over the floor grooves held their breath. The stolen heartbeats freed from Orvain's robes flickered in trembling palms. Even the heart clock seemed to pause, its golden gears holding Sayela Vale's hand in a cruel stillness. Caedren stared at the cracked staff. The black threads in his chest did not pull for one breath. They listened. Maren held the Heartfire between her palms. Its light narrowed into a blade-thin pulse that trembled toward the broken staff. Not because it wanted to kill, because something inside that staff was still asking to be released. Orvain's face had gone colorless. He clutched the staff against his chest. That voice is royal property. Caedren's eyes lifted. Every inch of him changed. Not louder, not crueler, colder. That voice is mine. Orvain smiled, desperate enough now to show teeth. No, Majesty. It is the first obedient beat of the crown. Without it, the Heart-Tithe loses its origin. Without the origin, every noble claim can be challenged. Every housefire can be called stolen. Every oath built on shared flame becomes unstable. Maren looked at him. Good. The word carried across the hall like a spark in dry straw. Orvain snapped the staff downward, trying to drive the cracked royal beat back into the heart clock. The gears answered with a hungry jerk. Sayela's hand bent under the pressure, and Maren felt the pain flash through the golden Heartfire into her own bones. She nearly stumbled. Caedren moved beside her, one hand still held open, the other pressed to the black thread nearest his chest. He did not pull it free. He held it still. What do we cut? He asked. Maren looked at the staff, then at the child voice trapped inside it. Not the voice, not the memory, the command around it. She lifted the Heartfire higher. The word that made him clap. Caedren understood. His face twisted once, not from weakness, but from the unbearable intimacy of striking at the first wound he had ever learned to obey. Orvain backed toward the clock. You cannot undo a king's first command without undoing the king it made. Maren stepped forward. He was not made by the command. Caedren's voice came low beside her. He survived it. The Heartfire flared. Inside the staff, the child's voice whispered again. Please. The word shook Caedren harder than any thread. Maren saw him almost break. Almost. Then his open hand moved not toward the staff, not toward the throne, not toward the Heartfire, but toward the space between his own palms. The place where the first clap had been forced. The place where refusal had never been allowed to live. He held that space open. Maren brought the Heartfire into it. The golden beat hovered between his hands and hers, suspended in a shared refusal. It did not choose one body over the other. It did not rush back into his chest. It did not bury itself in her palms. It waited for both of them to name the wrong rhythm. Caedren looked at the cracked staff. My father commanded me to clap. The staff pulsed black gold. Maren answered. But a command made through fear is not consent. The Heartfire struck. The staff split down its center. A scream tore out not Orvain's, not the dead king's, but the sound of old ritual losing its first excuse. Black gold flame poured from the crack and formed a memory in the air. Child Caedren, before the heart. Clock, tears on his face, his father's hands crushing his small palms together while the court clapped around him. This time, the memory did not continue. Maren stepped into it. Not physically. Not fully. But the Heartfire carried her refusal into the scene like light entering a sealed room. Child Caedren looked up. He saw her. His small hands were still trapped inside his father's grip. Maren did not reach to pull him away. She knew better now. The Heartfire had taught her. Rescue without consent could become another rhythm. So she knelt before the child and opened her own empty hands. "You do not have to answer that beat," she said. The child stared at her. Behind him, the dead king's command thundered through the memory. Again, the court's hands rose. Maren held still. Child Caedren looked at his father, then at Maren, then at the space between his own hands. For the first time in the memory, he tried to pull them apart. The dead king's grip tightened. Caedren in the present gasped as the pain struck through him. Maren did not look back. "Help him refuse." Adult Caedren's voice entered the memory, rough and breaking. "No." The child heard him. The heartfire blazed. Small Caedren's fingers opened. Not all the way. Enough. The forced clap broke before it landed. The memory shattered outward in golden fragments. Orvain's staff cracked completely. The old royal beat trapped inside it flew free, not into Caedren, not into Maren, but into the open space between them. It pulsed once, uncertain, like a child stepping out of a locked room into daylight. Caedren bowed his head. A thin golden halo flickered around his chest. Not whole. Not healed. His. The black threads loosened again, several snapping away from the floor grooves and curling into ash. The court's jewels dimmed further. Nobles cried out, but fewer clapped now. Fear remained, but it had lost the first rhythm it could hide behind. Orvain stared at the broken staff in his hands. For the first time, he looked less like a master of ritual, and more like a man holding a dead tool. Then he smiled, too slowly. Maren's blood went cold. "You freed the child's refusal," he said. "How touching." The heart clock answered his voice with a deep grinding sound. The deepest chamber began to close again. Sayla's hand slipped. Maren lunged forward, but the heartfire held her back with a warning pulse. Orvain lifted the broken staff, and from its hollow core fell a thin black key shaped like two hands pressed together. "The father's rhythm was origin," he said. "Not lock." He turned the key toward the heart clock. Caedren stepped forward, but the remaining threads seized him by the chest and held him in place. Orvain's eyes fixed on Maren. "The true lock has always been the servant who refused before you." The key entered the side of the heart clock. Sayla's voice broke through the gears, raw with pain. "Maren, do not trade hands." The deepest chamber opened wider, not to release her, but to show what had been hidden behind her wrist. A second hollow space. Empty. Waiting. Shaped exactly for Maren's hand. Orvain looked at the golden heartfire between them. "One refusal freed," he said. "One refusal must replace it." The empty hollow beside Sayla's wrist was not waiting for sacrifice. It was waiting for inheritance. That was how the heart clock had survived every refusal before Maren's. By teaching daughters that freeing a mother meant taking her place. By turning love into a hinge and calling the hinge duty. The shape in the deepest chamber was exact. Too exact. 5 narrow grooves for fingers. A burned curve for the heel of the palm. A golden pressure ring where the gears would close around flesh and keep it useful until the next girl came to save the last one. Maren stared at it, and for one breath she saw the entire trap. Not death. Continuation. Orvain had not built a prison that killed rebellion. He had built one that made rebellion pass itself down as service. Sayla's voice tore through the gears. "Do not." The word was weak, still a command Maren would obey before any kings. Caedren strained against the remaining black threads, his newly freed heart halo flickering at his chest like a flame-fighting wind. The child refusal they had released pulsed between them, small and bright, but not enough to break the clock. Not yet. Orvain held the black key in the side of the heart clock and smiled. A noble daughter would understand. Blood continues. Duty continues. The hand that saves the mother becomes the hand that preserves the realm. Maren looked at him. "I am not preserving your realm. You are preserving her." His gaze slid to Sayla's trapped hand. "Isn't that kinder?" Cruelty sounded most dangerous when it borrowed the shape of mercy. The golden heartbeat between Maren's palms trembled toward her mother. Sayla's fingers were weakening. The gears pressed in small, hungry increments. Every tick brought the teeth closer to closing. Maren stepped toward the chamber. Caedren's voice caught behind her. "Maren." She did not turn. "I will not tell you what to choose," he said. "Good. But the pain in his voice followed her anyway. Maren lifted one hand toward the empty hollow. The heart clock shivered in anticipation. Orvain's staff core glowed. The nobles leaned forward. Even some servants gasped, because all of them understood a daughter reaching for a mother. Then Maren stopped 1 inch before the groove. She did not place her hand inside. Instead, she turned her palm outward. Open, empty, refusing to fit. The heart clock jerked. Orvain's smile thinned. You cannot free a hand without giving one. Who taught you that? Maren asked. The question cut deeper than accusation. Orvain's eyes sharpened. Maren looked at the walls of the clock, at the gears, at the tiny hand marks carved into the inner rings. Who taught the clock that refusal has to be trapped in flesh? The heartfire pulsed. The deepest chamber answered with a sound like metal remembering shame. A hidden line of markings lit behind Sayla's wrist. Not noble script. Not royal decree. Servant scratches. Tiny marks cut into bronze by fingernails, needles, broken hairpins. Anything small enough to hide. Maren leaned closer. Namis. Dozens of names. Servants who had held the clock before Sayla. Not all for 7 years. Some for days. Some for hours. Some long enough to burn out and be recorded as coal fever. Each had been replaced by another hand because the clock had convinced the living that refusal required a body to suffer. Sayla had lasted because she had refused hardest. Maren's throat tightened. Mother, she whispered. You were not the first. Sayela's fingers trembled. No. Her mother breathed. But I wanted to be the last. The golden heartbeat flared. Caedren heard it too. His eyes moved over the servant marks, and the horror on his face deepened into something colder than guilt. Rage with direction. Orvain twisted the black key. Enough memory. The empty hollow began to pull. Maren's hand dragged forward against her will. Caedren tore one black thread from his chest with a hoarse sound, but 2 more wrapped around his arm and dragged him back. The noble's jewels sparked, trying to feed the clock enough power to close the trap. Servant hands over the grooves began to shake as the floor tried to pull rhythm through their palms. Maren fought the pull. Her fingers hovered over the hollow. Sayla's hand strained between the gears. Do not trade, Sayla whispered. I won't, Maren said. The heart fire between her hands surged not outward, not toward Orvain, but downward into the open space between her palm and the hollow. It did not fill the groove. It refused the shape. The clock screamed. Maren understood then. A Heartfire Keeper did not keep Heartfire by storing it. She kept the space where it could refuse. She opened both palms wider. One toward Sayla, one toward Caedren. Then refuse with me, she said. Sayla's burned fingers flexed. Caedren lifted his bloodied hands again, palms open despite the threads tearing at him. The freed servant heartbeats in the hall responded one by one. Nessa Breyer, Harlan Reed, Toma Vale. The names carried by the lower halls. Tiny pulses rose from servant hands. Not returning to the clock. Not entering Maren, but hovering in the air as separate beats, each refusing to become one forced rhythm. The noble's clapping faltered. Orvain's face went pale. No, the realm cannot survive divided beats. Maren looked at him. Then it never survived. It only repeated. Caedren's voice joined hers, rough but steady. No heart will beat for the throne by force. The heart clock cracked. Not from violence, from disagreement. The empty hollow beside Sayla's wrist began to melt at the edges. It could not hold an open palm. It could not trap a refusal that had become shared without becoming owned. Orvain ripped the black key free and drove it toward Maren's hand. Caedren moved first. The last threads through his chest tightened to the point of tearing. But he stepped into their pain and caught Orvain's wrist. The impact drove him to one knee, but his grip held. Not command. Interruption. Maren saw the cost in his face. If he held too long, the threads would drag his heart back through the old road. She turned to Sayla. Now. Her mother's hand moved. For the first time in 7 years, Sayla Vale did not hold the gears apart. She let go. The heart clock snapped shut. But there was no hand inside the second hollow. No replacement. No daughter traded for a mother. The gears struck empty refusal and shattered their own teeth. Golden fragments burst through the deepest chamber. Sayla's hand fell forward, free from the mechanism, shaking, burned, alive enough now to reach. Maren caught it. The moment their fingers touched, the golden heartbeat between Maren's hands split into two pulses. One flew to Sayla, one turned toward Caedren. Orvain screamed, "Do not let it return!" Caedren, still holding Orvain's wrist, looked at Maren. The question was there, raw and silent. "My eye." Maren looked at the heartfire that belonged to him. The beat her mother had taught to say no. The fire that had waited outside its rightful body until the road back was safe. She did not send it. She opened the way. The pulse entered Caedren's chest. His heart halo ignited in gold. For one brilliant breath, Dragon King Caedren Voryth looked whole. Then every noble claim still hidden in the court screamed awake. The hidden claims screamed because the heartfire had finally found its true body. Every jewel in the Ember Hall flared at once. Necklaces burned against noble throats. Rings tightened around jeweled fingers. Embroidered cuffs smoked with stolen gold. The court cried out as old agreements woke beneath their skin, each one pulling toward Caedren now that his heartfire had returned. Caedren staggered, one hand pressed to his chest. The golden heart halo around him burned bright, but not peacefully. It made every theft visible, every claim, every borrowed pulse, every noble house that had survived by calling another body's pain tradition. Maren held Sayla's freed hand with both of hers. Her mother had not fully stepped from the clock yet. Only her arm and shoulder had escaped the broken chamber, but the gears no longer held her fingers. Sayla shook violently, alive enough now to reach, but not strong enough to stand. "Maren," Sayla whispered. "I have you." "Not yet." Maren looked up. Orvain was still on one knee, but he was not defeated. The stolen servant beats had torn from his robes name by name, leaving burned seams behind. Yet something deeper pulsed beneath his chest, red gold, slow and old. Caedren saw it too. "You kept a claim for yourself." Orvain smiled through the smoke. "I kept the first repayment." The broken heart clock ticked again, not from Sayla's hand, not from the nobles, from Orvain. A red gold line crawled across Caedren's chest, trying to write itself over the heartfire that had just returned. "Property of the Heart-Tithe office." Maren's blood went cold. Orvain lifted his chin. "A king's heartfire cannot return without passing through the office that managed it." Caedren's voice turned deadly. "Managed? Preserved," Orvain said. "Directed. Distributed. Without us, your heart would have been only yours." Maren stepped forward, still holding Sayla's hand. "And that frightened you." The claim dug deeper into Caedren's chest. He gasped, but did not reach for Maren, did not demand the heartfire back through force, did not let pain become command. Maren looked at him. "Refuse it." Caedren pressed his palm over the burning words. "No office owns my heart." The claim flared. Orvain laughed once. "A king cannot refuse a covenant his crown inherited." Caedren's jaw tightened. "Then I refuse as the child whose beat was taken before he wore one." The red gold letters cracked. "Not enough." Orvain opened his palm. A black key unfolded from his skin like a claw. "And I accept that refusal into custody." The claim lunged for Caedren's heart. Maren moved, but not as a shield. She lifted Sayla's hand with hers, opening both their palms toward the claim. "Not custody," Maren said. Sayla's voice joined, weak but clear. "Witness." The freed servant heartbeats rose around them. Nessa Breyer, Harlan Reed, Toma Vale. Each small pulse burned like a witness instead of fuel. The claim halted, trapped in the space between the king it wanted to own and the hands it had once consumed. Orvain's smile thinned. Maren turned the golden heartfire toward him. "Name the hand that wrote the keeper." "Claim." The red gold claim split open. A memory appeared. Orvain as a younger man, standing before the heart clock while Sayla's hand was already trapped inside the gears. He pressed his palm beneath hers, not to free her, but to write himself into the system she had stopped from closing. He whispered, "If the king's heart ever returns, it returns through me." The claim burned brighter. Then it wrote his name in black gold fire. Orvain Marrowkeeper, who fed before all houses. The court recoiled, not because they were innocent, because the first mouth at the feast had been named. Orvain tore at the burning letters in the air. Someone must manage the debt. Maren looked at the broken heart clock. The half-freed Saela, the trembling Caedren, the dim noble jewels, and the servant heartbeats hovering like small stubborn stars. No, she said. Someone must end the office. The claim shook violently. The Ember Hall doors slammed shut. Every noble jewel still hiding an unconfessed claim lit red. The broken heart clock turned one final inner ring, revealing words carved deep beneath the old bronze. If the Heart-Tithe office falls, all unreleased claims return to their first wound. The unconfessed nobles began to scream. Maren looked at Caedren. Caedren looked at the memory of his own small hands. The first wound was not the throne. It was the child forced to clap. The first wound had been a child's hands forced together. Not a throne. Not a crown. Not a kingdom. A child. The final ring of the heart clock burned those words into the air, and every unconfessed noble claim screamed toward Caedren as if all the old debts had found the road home at once. Red gold threads tore from jewels, rings, collars, brooches, and embroidered cuffs, snapping across the Ember Hall toward the Dragon King's chest. Caedren stagel. Maren saw the truth before the court did. If the Heart-Tithe office fell carelessly, every hidden claim would return to the first wound. Not to the guilty houses, not to Orvain, not to the clock, but to the boy whose first clap had been stolen. The court would call it balance. The law would call it return. The machine would call it closure. It would be another sacrifice wearing a cleaner name. No, Maren said. The golden heartfire between her and Caedren flared. Orvain laughed from the floor, smoke curling from the black gold letters naming him keeper. You cannot end debt without sending it somewhere. Maren looked at him. That is because you only know how to move pain. The red gold claims pulled harder. Caedren's heart halo flickered violently. His hands shook, but he kept them open. He did not reach for the claims. He did not command them into himself. He stood before the wound that had made him king and refused to become its altar again. Maren held Saela's burned hand. Her mother's fingers were weak. But when Maren's grip tightened, Saela answered, not with strength, with steadiness. Do not catch what they threw, Saela whispered. Maren understood. She lifted her free hand toward the screaming claims, not to receive them, to stop them from landing unnamed. Every claim speaks before it returns, Maren said. The heartfire brightened. The claims froze inches from Caedren's chest. Red gold threads writhing like snakes caught in light. Orvain's face hardened. You have no authority. Caedren's voice came rough but clear. She has mine to stop what was done to me. Maren turned to him sharply. He corrected himself before she could speak. No. Not authority over the heartfire. Witness before the court. Good. That was enough. Maren faced the nobles. Name what your houses took. No one moved. The claims pulled against the heartfire, hungry to return to the first wound rather than be confessed. Maren looked at the nearest nobleman, whose ruby ring burned like a trapped coal. Name it. He shook his head. My house will fall. Then let it fall without a stolen heartbeat under it. His mouth trembled. The red thread from his ring jerked toward Caedren. Maren opened her palm wider. The heartfire did not burn the man. It burned the lie around him. One pulse, he choked, for a ward that never repaid. The thread snapped away from Caedren and burned to ash before touching him. Another noblewoman cried out as her necklace tightened. 2 pulses, she sobbed. For a bloodline curse. Another thread burned. Then another. Then another. Some confessed quickly. Some collapsed under shame. Some had to be named by servants who had cleaned the rooms where the bargains were made. But every spoken claim lost the power to return to the child wound. The heartfire did not demand punishment yet. It demanded truth first. Orvain watched his office die name by name. You will leave the realm weak, he hissed. Maren looked at the dimming jewels, the shaking nobles, the servants holding freed heartbeats, the Dragon King bleeding light instead of command. No, she said. We will leave it honest enough to learn strength. The last unconfessed thread remained. It came from Orvain, not from his robes. From beneath his ribs, where the keeper claim still beat like a parasite that had mistaken itself for a heart. Caedren stepped forward. Maren stopped him with one look. This was not his wound to swallow. She faced Orvain. Name what you took. Orvain's lips peeled back. I took what kings were too sentimental to use properly. Saela's hand tightened in Maren's. Maren's voice lowered. Name it. The Heartfire turned white gold. Orvain screamed as the keeper claim tore open. I took first feeding. He spat. From every tithe, every house, every servant marked coal, fever. Every king kept hollow enough to need me. The claim burst. Black gold fire poured out, carrying hundreds of tiny beats. They did not enter Maren. They did not enter Caedren. They rose above the hall, each one waiting for a name. Servants began speaking. Nessa Briar, Harlan Reed, Maren Vale, Sira of the East Hearth. One by one the beats found memory. Some returned to living hands. Some faded into peaceful sparks for the dead. None returned to Orvain. The heart clock groaned. Its final ring cracked. Caedren lifted both open hands. The Heart-Tithe office is ended. The court shook. Maren lifted Saela's hand with hers. No Heartfire may be claimed by rhythm, office, crown, house, or inherited need, Saela whispered. No servant hand shall hold the gears for another. The golden Heartfire pulsed once. The heart clock broke, not exploding, opening. Its bronze ribs unfolded like a cage, remembering it had once been metal, not law. The gears fell apart in harmless golden dust. The grooves in the floor dimmed. The noble jewels went dark, not dead, but emptied of theft. Saela fell forward. Maren caught her mother fully this time. Her body was thin, burned, barely strong enough to breathe, but real. Alive. Not useful. Not trapped. Not a hand in a machine. Maren pressed her forehead to Saela's shoulder and finally let herself shake. Caedren stood apart, one hand over his restored Heartfire. The golden halo around his chest was still fractured. It would not heal in one glorious breath. It had been stolen from a child and fed through a kingdom for years. Return was not the same as repair, but it was his. For the first time, no thread ran from his chest into the court. Orvain tried to crawl toward the broken clock. A servant girl from the lower hearths stepped on his staff before he reached it. Then another servant stood beside her. Then another. No one struck him. No one needed to. The court saw him without rhythm, office, or borrowed flame. Just a man who had fed on pain and called it order. Caedren looked at Maren. What judgment do you require? Maren kept one arm around Saela. Not yours alone. He bowed his head. Then by those he fed upon. Maren looked at the servants holding returned beats, the nobles whose stolen jewels had gone dark, the king whose hands remained open, and every house that lived by Heartfire will answer to the names it took from. Caedren nodded. It will be written. No, Maren said. It will be witnessed. A faint, tired smile touched Saela's mouth. Dawn entered the Ember Hall through the high dragon glass windows. Without the heart clock, the light looked different. Less grand. More honest. It touched ash, cracked marble, dead jewels, broken cords, and empty hands. Maren looked down at her palms. Still raw, still servant hands, no longer empty. The golden Heartfire rested in Caedren's chest now. But a small warmth remained in Maren's skin. Not stolen power, not royal claim, not a crown mark. A refusal remembered. Caedren stepped closer, then stopped at a respectful distance. Maren Vale. She looked at him. His voice softened, but did not lose its weight. I mocked empty hands because I had been taught only clapping hands could hold a kingdom together. Maren held her mother tighter. And now? He opened his palms. Now I know empty hands can stop one from being stolen. The hall did not cheer. It listened. That was better. Maren turned toward the broken heart clock, toward the servants, toward the nobles who would have to learn how to live without stolen rhythm, toward the Dragon King who had finally refused with her instead of above her. She was not the court's new keeper, not the king's cure, not the daughter traded for the mother. She was Maren Vale, daughter of Saela Vale, Heartfire Keeper of the refusal no crown could own. And when the last gear fell silent, the kingdom heard its first honest heartbeat.